One of the most harrowing and sadistic sights of the Second World War greeted the British and Canadian soldiers who liberated Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. It was agreed by the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, to hand over the camp without a fight, and the SS officers forced some prisoners to bury the dead. But when the Allied liberators entered the barbed wire fences, they came across roughly 13,000 unburied corpses and bodies, and roughly 60,000 prisoners who were suffering a great deal, and thousands were days away from death themselves. The men who encountered the terror were left with what they saw imprinted on their minds for the rest of their lives. But the takeover of Bergen-Belsen was not without further bloodshed. There were some SS guards who remained at the camp, and some tried to hide out and escape the watchful eyes of the British, but others tried to make a run for it. There were some former guards who were shot, and these were caught up in reprisals, as the liberators sought some vengeance for the prisoners who were suffering so much. Today we look at the Bergen-Belsen Liberation Reprisal executions. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On the 12th of April 1945, officials of the Wehrmacht met with the British at a bridge at Vinsen, and then in the evening an agreement was signed creating a 48 square kilometre perimeter around Bergen-Belsen, and this was declared a neutral zone between the Allied and German soldiers to protect the prisoners within Bergen-Belsen. With this agreement, most of the SS guards were allowed to leave the camp, but a few of them, including female guards, decided to remain to allegedly uphold order inside the camp. Women such as Irma Grazer and Elizabeth Falkenrath had the chance to escape, but they did not want to, instead deciding to risk it as they believed they wouldn't face any reprisal at the end of the war in Europe. In the days leading up to the liberation, hundreds were dying each day, and in April 1945, around 10,000 prisoners of the camp died. The British did not get to Bergen-Belsen until the afternoon of the 15th of April 1945, and they then liberated the camp. When they entered, as mentioned, 13,000 unburied corpses were found, and the prisoners, 60,000 of them, were suffering from no food, and they were sick from diseases such as typhus. Many of the liberators would get the disease too. A news reporter summed up the feeling at Belsen. He claimed, "Here, over an acre of ground lay dead and dying people. You could not see which was which. The living lay with their heads against the corpses, and around them moved the awful, ghostly procession of emaciated, aimless people, with nothing to do, and with no hope of life, unable to move out of your way, unable to look at the terrible sights around them. Babies had been born here, tiny things that could not live. A mother driven mad screamed at a British sentry to give her milk for her child. This day at Belsen was the most horrible of my life." Guards were pressed into action, and the Hungarian forces were ordered to take control of the camp, and they replaced German SS guards. To begin with, only Commandant Josef Kramer was arrested, but the guards who had been hiding amongst the inmates were eventually turned over. Now, the British liberators, specifically Lieutenant Colonel Taylor, had stated to the former Commandant Kramer that for every inmate of the camp who was shot, one SS man will be executed. There were reports of rioting inside of the cookhouses, as some inmates were starving and were trying to get some food supplies inside one of the storehouses there. What came next was one of the first executions of the liberation. The Hungarian soldiers who had been placed in charge over the SS, and who, let's remember, were allied to the Nazis under the Axis alliance, then shot a number of prisoners. Some prisoners were killed by the Hungarians as they tried to put down the little riot, and one who was wounded was actually carried to the hospital block by Josef Kramer, the commandant himself. Hungarian guards also replaced SS guards inside of the watchtowers, and these were unlikely to fire upon the SS, as they had been previously allied to them. But the British thought that they were more reliable and less likely to shoot prisoners than the SS were. Hours after the British had entered Belsen, there was another bit of disorder breaking out in one of the storerooms, specifically in the clothing stores. The inmates were flocking to try and get some new clothes to wear, and the prisoners took possession of one of the empty huts in the SS compound, and to try and get them to disperse, the British Army soldiers fired shots well over the heads of the inmates to try and keep order. The prisoners then raided the pigsty at the back of Block 9 and slaughtered 50 pigs to try and get some food. They then continued on to Block 50, and inside of there were many tents, which were used for prisoners to sit under. But then came the reprisals. The angry and suffering prisoners were running riot throughout the camp, and in this they began to target many of those people who had kept them in submission for so long. Those specifically who were searched for were the prisoner functionaries, or kapos as they were known. These were prisoners who were assigned by the SS guards to supervise forced labour groups and larger groups of inmates, and someone becoming a kapo was said to have been the biggest insult to the prisoners. At the end of the war, many kapos were subjected to reprisals, including mass lynchings upon the liberation of the camps. Inside of Camp 2 in Belsen, and the barracks specifically, 7 kapos were seized in the evening, and they were then executed, presumably beaten to death, or lynched, being hanged in public. But in the days following the liberation, further reprisal took place. On the 17th of April, also inside Camp 2, 7 more kapos were found, and the former inmates approached them and beat them to death, leaving their bodies in the dirt. There was a further incident also involving capo Erik Zerdel, and he shot a female prisoner dead outside one of the blocks. A witness claimed that all I saw is Erik standing there, holding his neck, the girl lying on the ground, and a tall man running away. It is disgusting now. Everybody is sleeping with everybody else. Such things are all right in private, but together in the block it's disgusting. Zerdel would later be executed for the crime of killing that woman in an act of jealousy. With 13,000 unburied corpses lying all around Bergen-Belsen, the clean-up operation began, and realising they did not have enough people to bury the bodies quickly, the remaining guards who had been captured, including the women, were tasked to help clean up. Huge mass graves had been dug, and the guards were then ordered to carry the typhus-infected remains, and the corpses were so rotten that limbs came off. For some of the guards this was the ultimate humiliation, and the clean-up began on the 18th of April 1945. One of the SS men who was burying the dead actually took his own life, being another guard to die after liberation, as the ordeal was allegedly too rough for him, and he knew he would possibly later be condemned for his actions. But then some SS men believed the clean-up was beneath them, and 2 of them were shot by the British as they tried to escape. One of these was shot in the large water supply in the women's camp, and his body was eventually fished out. On the 19th of April, another one of the SS staff used in the burial detachments took their own lives, and another 2 made a break for it for the gates and the fences, trying to escape, but yet again they were shot by the British and killed, and their bodies would then be thrown into one of the mass graves alongside the prisoners of the camp who had died. It was on this day that 49 male guards and 26 female guards were arrested, and around 20 of them died in the following weeks, some from sepsis, and the majority died from typhus, contracted from burying the bodies. On the 20th of April, another SS guard was shot trying to attempt to escape. The guards had been placed on starvation rations and were not given protective clothing to deal with the bodies. The slaughter kept continuing amongst the prisoner population as they targeted the kapos, and in total it's believed that around 170 of them, 170 kapos, were killed, being beaten to death and being hanged in public around the camp, so that everyone could see that some form of vengeance had been carried out upon those who inflicted the pain and suffering. In the months after the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, there was a trial that took place, in which Commandant Josef Kramer and other guards, such as Irma Grazer and Elisabeth Volkenrath, were condemned to death for their work at Bergen-Belsen. These were then hanged on the gallows by British executioner Albert Pierpoint, but in the direct aftermath of the liberation, there were roughly 170 kapos who were executed by the prisoner population in reprisal, and a number of SS guards who were shot by the liberators, most who were attempting to escape during the clean-up of the camp. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.